The moment my lawyer, Mr. Thompson, slid the folder across his polished mahogany desk, my stomach dropped. It was a thick manila folder, innocent enough, but the weight of it felt like a lead brick against my chest. I remember the smell of stale coffee and old paper in his office, a smell that now makes my skin crawl. He didn't look at me, just kept his eyes on the folder as he pushed it closer. "John," he said, his voice grave, "I am sorry to be the one to tell you this." My heart started to pound. I had no idea what he was talking about. Was it my family's trust fund? Had something gone wrong with an investment? My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, none of them preparing me for what he said next. He looked up, then his face a mask of professional sympathy. "Your wife Sarah is suing you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Suing me? For what? We were married. We were happy. We were building a life together. Just last week we'd been laughing over dinner, planning our next vacation. This couldn't be right. Suing me for what? I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. He opened the folder and pointed to a page. "For half of her business, the business you funded with your trust fund money." A cold, heavy silence filled the room. It wasn't just the words, it was the entire concept that felt like a punch to the gut. Sarah, my Sarah, the woman I loved more than anything in the world, the woman whose dreams I'd poured my heart and soul, and every spare dollar from my trust, into making real. It felt like yesterday, but it was 5 years ago, when I first met Sarah at that art gallery opening. She was standing by a painting, her fiery red hair catching the light, her eyes sparkling as she described the artist's technique to a group of bored-looking people. I was mesmerized. I'd never met anyone with such passion, such raw energy. I was from a quiet old money family, my life always comfortable, sometimes boring. Sarah was a wildfire. We talked for hours that night, about art, about life, about our dreams. Mine were vague, comfortable. Hers were vivid, ambitious. She wanted to build a company, an online platform that connected struggling artists with art buyers, making the art world less intimidating, more accessible. She called it ArtBridge. She had the vision, the drive, the talent. What she lacked was capital. I had the capital. My family's trust fund had been set up generations ago, paid out a generous allowance, more than enough for my comfortable life, and allowed for significant withdrawals for major life events or investments. With proper documentation, I'd never really touched the principal. It was just there, a safety net. When Sarah first pitched me ArtBridge, her eyes alight with excitement, I saw more than just a business idea. I saw a future. Our future. I saw a way to help her, to be a part of her dream. We spent weeks poring over business plans, sketching out logos, brainstorming names. I was more than just a checkbook. I was her partner. I believed in her, in us. I remember the day I told her I'd fund it. We were sitting on my apartment floor, surrounded by notebooks and empty coffee cups. "Sarah," I said, taking her hand, "I want to put my trust fund money into this. All of it. What we need for the first few years. Let's make ArtBridge happen." Her eyes welled up. She threw her arms around me, burying her face in my shoulder. "John," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you are my angel, my hero. We're going to build this together." We got married 6 months later. It was a small ceremony, just close family and friends. We were so in love. Sarah wore a simple white dress, her smile radiant. I remember thinking I was the luckiest man in the world. We were a team. ArtBridge was our baby, our shared venture. We had a joint bank account for household expenses. but the business account was separate, solely for ArtBridge. I signed the checks, transferred the money, managed the initial funding. Sarah handled the creative and operational side. It felt like a perfect partnership. We poured our lives into it. I worked tirelessly alongside her, not just signing checks, but helping with market research, setting up the initial legal framework, even helping design some of the early website mock-ups. Late nights fueled by coffee and pizza, brainstorming sessions that lasted until dawn, celebrating every small victory, the first artist who signed up, the first sale, the first positive review. We built it from the ground up, together. And it took off. ArtBridge became wildly successful. Sarah was lauded as a visionary, a trailblazer. I was proud of her, of us. We bought a beautiful house, went on amazing vacations, lived a life of comfort and joy. Our love seemed to deepen with every success. Now, sitting in Mr. Thompson's office, clutching a legal document that accused me of God knows what, it all felt like a twisted, cruel joke. Half her business. Her business. It was our business, funded by my money. Money that was meant to secure my future, but which I'd gladly invested in what I thought was our shared future. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. John, it says here that Sarah is claiming the funds you provided were a gift or an investment with no expectation of ownership. She's claiming it was her intellectual property, her labor, her vision that built the company, and that your contribution was merely financial and essentially a donation to her cause. A donation. I gave her everything. I gave her my trust, my future, my heart. And now she wanted to take away the very thing we built together. The thing that had consumed our lives for years. Paper felt cold and sharp in my hands. A death sentence for my marriage, for my belief in love, for everything I thought I knew. This wasn't just a lawsuit. This was an eviction notice for my own life. The early days of ArtBridge were a whirlwind of excitement and sheer exhaustion. Sarah and I were a force of nature, or at least that's how it felt. I remember waking up before dawn, buzzing with ideas, often finding Sarah already at her laptop, surrounded by sketches and half-empty coffee mugs. Our apartment, once a quiet bachelor pad, had transformed into a vibrant war room. Post-it notes plastered on every surface, whiteboards covered in flowcharts, the smell of freshly printed paper always in the air. My role wasn't just financial, not in the beginning. Sarah had the incredible vision for how ArtBridge would operate, the user experience, the marketing angles. But I brought the practical side. I researched the legal structures for online marketplaces, helped draft the terms of service, and navigated the complex world of payment processing. I spent hours on the phone with accountants, lawyers, and tech consultants, ensuring every piece of the foundation was solid. I even taught myself basic coding to understand the developers Sarah hired, making sure we weren't getting ripped off. I was the silent partner, the behind-the-scenes guy, the one who made sure the engine ran smoothly so Sarah could drive the car. The money, of course, was key. My trust fund wasn't a bottomless pit, but it was substantial. My family had always been very hands-off with it, preferring me to learn responsibility rather than just squander it. But there were rules. Significant withdrawals, especially for business ventures, needed careful documentation. My family's lawyers had even suggested a formal investment agreement with Sarah. I remembered scoffing at the idea. Mr. Thompson, I told him on the phone, a year before he delivered the lawsuit. This isn't just an investment. This is for my future wife, for our business. It's a partnership of love, not just money. He'd sighed and simply said, "Love can complicate matters, John. It's always best to have things clear on paper." I'd laughed it off, secure in my belief in Sarah and our bond. That laugh now echoed with a hollow, bitter sound in my memory. I drew down a significant portion of my trust, enough to cover the initial years of operation, including office space, salaries, software development, and marketing campaigns. It wasn't just pocket money. It was a substantial chunk, the kind of money that would set someone up for life. I was 28 at the time, and it felt right to use my privilege to build something meaningful with the woman I loved. I told myself it was for our future, our family. For the first 2 years, we were inseparable. We celebrated every milestone like it was Christmas. The first time a famous artist joined ArtBridge, we popped champagne. When we hit our first million in sales, we took a spontaneous trip to Paris. Every success was a shared triumph. Sarah would publicly thank me at industry events, sometimes even pulling me on stage for a quick hug, calling me her rock and the financial wizard behind the curtain. Those moments, I thought, were proof of our unbreakable bond. But then slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. As ArtBridge grew from a promising startup into a booming success, Sarah became more and more the public face. She was on magazine covers, interviewed on podcasts, speaking at conferences. Her name became synonymous with the company. Mine, meanwhile, faded into the background. I was still there, helping with strategy, reviewing finances, but my contributions became less visible, less celebrated. It started subtly. Sarah would say, "I really need to focus on this pitch," or "I am swamped with interviews. Can you handle the accounting for a bit?" At first, it made sense. She was the CEO, the visionary. I was happy to support her. But then those bits became permanent. The we, when talking about the business, slowly morphed into I. "My team achieved X," she'd say in interviews, rather than "our team." "My vision for ArtBridge is Y, not our vision." I tried not to let it bother me. It was her baby in a way. She was the one out there taking the spotlight, dealing with the pressure. I was happy to be her support system. My love for her was unconditional. I wanted her to shine, but there were moments. I remember one evening, after a particularly exhausting week of managing our contractors, I asked her, "Hey, can we talk about that new marketing campaign? I had some ideas for targeting Gen Z." She was on her phone, scrolling through social media, barely looking up. "Oh, I already approved the new campaign with Emily in marketing," she said absently. "She's got it covered." It stung. It was a small thing, but it felt like a door had been quietly shut in my face. My input, once valued, now seemed unnecessary. I started spending more time on my personal hobbies, reading, working out, trying to fill the void that ArtBridge used to occupy in my life. I told myself it was healthy. We were just finding a new balance. Truth was, I felt increasingly like a passenger in a car I had helped build, while Sarah was speeding away, leaving me in the dust. I remember talking to my best friend Mark about it. "She's just busy, man," he said, trying to be helpful. "Her company is huge now, that's a good thing, right?" I'd nod, trying to convince myself it was. But deep down I felt a growing unease. The foundation of our shared dream, the one I thought was built on rock-solid trust and mutual effort, suddenly felt like it was resting on shifting sand. And I had no idea how quickly that sand was about to collapse beneath my feet. The subtle shifts in our relationship became less subtle as ArtBridge soared to new heights. The late-night brainstorming sessions we once shared became late-night calls for Sarah, often with investors or business partners I didn't know. Our dinners together, once intimate conversations about our day, turned into monologues from Sarah about ArtBridge's latest triumphs or challenges, with me nodding along, offering quiet support. It wasn't just the business. It was our personal life too. I started feeling like I was living with a stranger, or perhaps a celebrity I admired from afar. Sarah's focus was singular, intense. Every conversation, every plan, every thought seemed to loop back to ArtBridge. If I suggested a weekend getaway, she'd check her work calendar first. Then usually find a reason why she couldn't take the time off. If I wanted to talk about something bothering me, she'd give me a distracted nod and a quick, "Sounds tough, honey, but I really need to finish this report." The arguments started small, like tiny cracks appearing in a perfectly painted wall. We'd squabble about money, even though we had plenty. Sarah would sometimes question my spending on personal things, even though my trust fund continued to provide for my personal allowance, separate from the business funds. "Do you really need that new watch, John?" she'd ask, a critical edge to her voice. "We should be reinvesting every penny into ArtBridge." It struck me as odd. The trust fund was mine. The business was separate. And hadn't I already invested the foundational pennies, the big ones from that trust? Once, during a rare weekend trip, I saw her looking through old photos on her phone. She was scrolling past pictures of us together in the early days, looking at pictures of the ArtBridge team at launch events, then stopping on a selfie of her standing in front of the new ArtBridge headquarters building, alone. Her face in that photo was filled with a fierce pride I hadn't seen directed at me in a while. I tried to talk to her about it. I remember the exact conversation. We were sitting on the couch after a quiet dinner, the television playing softly in the background. "Sarah," I began, choosing my words carefully, "I feel like we're drifting apart. ArtBridge is amazing. I am so proud of you. But I miss us. I miss our time together, the way we used to talk about everything." She put down her phone, her expression hardening slightly. "John, I am building something incredible here. Something that will change the art world. It takes sacrifice. You know that. And frankly, your support has become more like a distraction lately." My blood ran cold. "A distraction? Sarah, I helped you build this from nothing. I put my entire future into this business. How is that a distraction?" She sighed, a weary, dismissive sound. "Yes, you provided the initial capital, and I am grateful for that. But the vision, the execution, the endless hours, the marketing, the strategy, that's all me, John. You've been comfortable living off your trust fund, while I've been working myself to the bone. You don't understand the pressure I am under." Her words stung worse than any physical blow. Comfortable. Living off my trust fund. I had poured my energy, my time, my trust into her dream. I had chosen to use my trust fund to support her ambition, sacrificing my own peace of mind. And now she was twisting it into an accusation. I felt a surge of anger, quickly followed by confusion. Was I being unfair? Was I jealous, as she seemed to imply? Had I somehow become a burden instead of a partner? My own privilege, the very thing that allowed me to fund ArtBridge in the first place, suddenly felt like a weight, a barrier between us. It was as if my financial contribution, instead of being a bridge, had become a wall. Friends started noticing too. My best friend Mark once pulled me aside at a party Sarah had organized for ArtBridge investors. "Dude," he whispered, "is everything okay with you and Sarah? She barely looked at you tonight. And she was talking about my company and my vision the whole time. It felt like you were just another guest." I defended her, of course. "She's just under a lot of pressure, Mark. It's a huge business now." But his words echoed my own growing fears. The last big argument before the lawsuit was about our 5-year anniversary. I had planned a surprise trip to Italy, to the Amalfi Coast, a place she'd always dreamed of visiting. I wanted to rekindle the spark, to remind us of the love that started it all. When I presented her with the tickets, her reaction was muted. She picked up the boarding passes, looked at them for a long moment, and then, without looking at me, said, "John, this is beautiful, but I can't go. I have a major product launch that week. And a potential acquisition deal I am negotiating. This is just bad timing." My heart sank. "Bad timing? Sarah, it's our 5th anniversary. I planned this months ago." She put the tickets down on the coffee table, her gaze distant. "I know, and I appreciate the thought. But I have to prioritize the business. It's too important. It's my life now." "It's our life," I exclaimed, my voice cracking. "It's what we built together." She finally looked at me, her eyes cold, devoid of the warmth I remembered. "John, you lent me the money to start. I built this. I created it. It's mine." That was the first time she had ever uttered those words. It's mine, not ours, not a shared venture, just hers. Cracks in our foundation had suddenly widened into a chasm. I stood there, holding the tickets to a dream vacation that would never happen, realizing with chilling clarity that the woman I loved had slipped away, leaving behind a stranger who saw me not as a partner, but as a bank. Terrifying whisper of betrayal began to grow louder in the silence of our once happy home. After the anniversary trip debacle, the atmosphere in our home turned arctic. Sarah and I lived under the same roof, but occupied different planets. She would retreat to her home office, sometimes for days, emerging only for meals that we mostly ate in silence. The laughter, the easy companionship, the affectionate touches, all vanished. It was like living in a beautiful, empty museum of our past happiness. I tried desperately to bridge the gap. I wrote her a long letter, pouring out my heart, expressing my hurt, my confusion, my yearning for the connection we once shared. I reminded her of our early days, of the sacrifices we both made, of our shared dreams. I left it on her pillow, hoping it would cut through the coldness. She never acknowledged it. The letter remained on her pillow for days, then mysteriously disappeared. I never asked her about it, afraid of the answer. Afraid of the answer, afraid of the finality it might bring. My suspicion, which had been a quiet whisper, began to grow into a persistent hum. I started noticing things, small things at first. Sarah started receiving calls on a separate phone, which she'd always keep close, often stepping out of the room to answer. She'd mention private meetings with investors or consultants, but give vague details. I dismissed it as a busy, successful life, but the seeds of doubt were undeniably planted. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to get water and saw her laptop open on the counter. She'd stepped away for a moment. A document was open on the screen. It was a draft of a contract with clauses about intellectual property rights and equity distribution. My eyes scanned it and then landed on a specific phrase. The founder, Sarah Jennings, maintained sole and exclusive ownership of all intellectual property and trade secrets related to ArtBridge. It was jarring. Why would she be drafting a document emphasizing sole ownership? We were married. We were partners. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was a boilerplate for something. An agreement with new hires. Or a pitch to investors. But a knot of dread formed in my stomach. Later that week, I overheard her on the phone, her voice hushed. She was talking about legal strategy and minimizing exposure. The words were clipped, cold, and she seemed to be discussing me without using my name. He thinks he's entitled to half, she said, a dry laugh following. It was a gift, for God's sake. A personal loan, if anything. A personal loan, if anything. A personal loan. My blood ran cold. My trust fund money, the capital that launched her entire empire, was now being characterized as a personal loan. With no agreement, no repayment schedule, just a casual throwaway line. This wasn't just a miscommunication. This was a deliberate rewriting of our shared history. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of unspoken truths. The woman I had committed my life to, the woman I had trusted implicitly, was now actively planning something behind my back. The evidence, though circumstantial, was piling up. Coldness, the distance, the subtle dismissals, the legal jargon on her screen, the hushed phone calls. It all pointed to one terrible conclusion. I tried to confront her again, this time with more directness. One Saturday morning, as she was getting ready to leave for a work brunch, I sat her down. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what's going on? You are acting differently. You are talking about me in vague terms to others, and I saw something on your laptop. Are you planning something I should know about?" She looked at me, her face impassive. "John, I am busy. I am running a multi-million-dollar company. I don't have time for your paranoia. I am simply making sure all my legal ducks are in a row, as any responsible CEO would." Her eyes flickered away from mine. "And what did you see on my laptop? Were you snooping?" The accusation of snooping, a deflection, infuriated me. "I walked by and saw it, Sarah. It mentioned sole ownership. What does that mean for us? For ArtBridge?" She finally met my gaze, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not anger, not sadness, but a calculated resolve. "It means, John, that I built this company. I am the founder, the CEO, the brain behind ArtBridge. You provided the initial seed money, yes, but that was a gift, given out of love. It was never intended to give you ownership. A gift." The word echoed from Mr. Thompson's office even before he'd said it. She had prepared for this. She had rehearsed this line. "A gift?" I repeated, incredulous. "Sarah, that was my trust fund, my future. We spent years building this together as husband and wife. We talked about it as our company." "People say things when they're starting out, John," she said, her voice flat. "They make promises, but the reality is I did the work, I took the risks. You were comfortable, you had your trust fund, you didn't need the equity. I did, I earned it." I felt a dizzying sense of unreality. This wasn't my wife. This was a stranger, coldly dismantling our shared history, brick by agonizing brick. Her words, so detached and clinical, were far more devastating than any angry shout. They erased our partnership, minimized my contribution, redefined our love as a mere financial transaction. "So," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "this means you are leaving me and you are taking ArtBridge." She didn't confirm, didn't deny. She simply stood up, picked up her purse, and walked towards the door. "I have to go, John, my brunch." And just like that, she was gone. The door clicked shut, sealing the fate of our marriage. I stood alone in the quiet house, the smell of her perfume still lingering, feeling like I had just watched my entire world crumble. The whisper of betrayal was now a deafening roar. I knew with absolute certainty that the call from Mr. Thompson was no random event. It was the calculated culmination of a plan I was too blind, too trusting, too in love to see. The second meeting with Mr. Thompson was even more agonizing than the first. This time I wasn't just shocked. I was devastated, heartbroken, and utterly bewildered. I sat across from him, numb as he laid out the grim reality of Sarah's lawsuit. "So, John," he began, his voice surprisingly gentle for a lawyer, "Sarah's legal team is arguing that the funds you provided were a marital gift, given without any formal agreement of ownership or equity. They'll claim that your trust fund money was an asset for your personal use, and that you chose to gift it to her venture out of spousal support, not as an investment for a partnership." "But that's insane," I interjected, my voice hoarse. "We planned it together. We called it our business. I worked on it too." Mr. Thompson sighed, rubbing his temple. "Emotionally, I understand, John, but legally, it's a difficult position. Do you have any written agreements? Any contracts stating your ownership percentage? Any emails or texts explicitly discussing your equity stake?" I racked my brain, frantically searching through memories. "No, not explicitly. We were married. We trusted each other. We talked about it as our baby, our future. We didn't need contracts. We had love." He looked at me with a sad, knowing expression. "Love, unfortunately, is not legally binding in a business context, especially when it comes to separate assets, like a trust fund. Unless those funds were explicitly designated as an investment in exchange for equity, it's going to be an uphill battle." He explained the core of Sarah's argument. She would claim that while I provided the initial capital, it was her intellectual property, her unique idea, her business model, her creative vision. That was the true engine of ArtBridge. She would emphasize her relentless labor, the countless hours she put in, the personal sacrifices she made to build the company from the ground up. My contribution, she would argue, was merely financial, and that money, once given, became her property to use as she saw fit for her business. She's also arguing that your trust fund money itself wasn't marital property," Mr. Thompson continued, "but your separate asset. Therefore, any funds you gifted from it to her venture are seen as a separate transaction, not a shared marital investment in a joint business." The legal jargon was overwhelming, but the implications were crystal clear. Sarah was trying to erase my entire contribution, to reframe my sacrifice as a mere handout, and to claim everything we built as solely hers. The injustice of it was a physical ache in my chest. But I was involved, I insisted, desperate. I helped with the legal setup, the finances, the initial market research. I was there every step of the way. "Can you prove it?" Mr. Thompson asked. "Do you have specific logs of ours, detailed emails of your direct contributions, that weren't just helping your wife but acting as an owner? Did you have a formal role with a specific title and duties, separate from your role as her husband?" The questions hung in the air, damning in their clarity. I had no formal title. I wasn't on the payroll in the early days, because we were bootstrapping, and my trust fund was covering the expenses. My work was done out of love, out of a sense of partnership, not as an employee seeking compensation, or a documented equity holder. The emotional toll began to manifest in physical ways. I couldn't sleep. My appetite vanished. Every bite of food felt like sawdust in my mouth. My mind replayed every memory, every conversation, searching for a sign I had missed, a clue that would have warned me. How could I have been so blind, so trusting? I remembered the gentle warnings from my family's old lawyer about proper documentation for business investments. Warnings I had dismissed with a wave of my hand, fueled by my naive belief in love's enduring power. Now, those dismissed warnings felt like a cosmic joke played at my expense. "John," Mr. Thompson said, his voice bringing me back to the present, "we need to find anything, no matter how small, that indicates an intent for you to have an ownership stake. Intervs, text messages, even witness testimony from mutual friends or early employees who saw your involvement as more than just a husband helping his wife." Hope, a tiny flickering flame, ignited within me. "There have to be things," I muttered. She always referred to it as our business in the beginning. She introduced me as her partner in the early days. Surely, that counts for something. Mr. Thompson gave me a slight, weary smile. "It's a start. It's better than nothing. But intent is hard to prove without a paper trail. We're fighting against a well-funded, highly motivated opponent who has been planning this for a while." The word opponent struck me like a shard of ice. Sarah, my wife, my love, was now my opponent. The thought alone was unbearable. The woman I had vowed to cherish, the woman I had given my future to, was now actively working to strip me of everything. The business, my money, and worst of all, my faith in our entire relationship. Walking out of Mr. Thompson's office, the setting sun cast long, menacing shadows. The world felt muted, a grim, colorless landscape. My entire life, the one I had so carefully constructed, the one filled with love and shared dreams, had been reduced to a legal dispute, and I was standing on the precipice of losing it all. Not to a bad investment or a market crash, but to the very person I had loved the most. Cold, hard truth was setting in. My heart had been foolish, and my trust fund had paid the ultimate price. The house, once filled with the echoes of our shared life, now felt like a mausoleum. Sarah had moved into a guest room, a symbolic declaration of the chasm between us. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, cold stares, and the constant unnerving silence. I knew she was planning her next legal moves, and I was just trying to breathe. One evening, after another tense, wordless dinner, I decided I couldn't bear the silence anymore. I found Sarah in the living room, scrolling through her phone. "Sarah," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "We need to talk, not as lawyers or opponents, but as two people who were once married." She looked up, her face devoid of emotion. "Here is nothing left to talk about, John. My lawyer is handling everything." "This isn't about the lawyers," I pleaded. "This is about us. How can you do this? How can you erase everything we built, everything we were?" A flicker of something crossed her face then, something I couldn't quite identify. Not remorse, not regret, but perhaps a glimpse of the fierce, unyielding drive that had both attracted me to her and now seemed to be destroying us. "You don't understand, John," she said, her voice low and firm. "This business, ArtBridge, is everything to me. It's my legacy. It's what I built with my own two hands, my own mind." "With my money," I retorted, the words bursting out. "My trust fund." "The money that was meant for our future." She scoffed, a bitter sound. "Your money. Always your money. You never had to fight for anything, John. You were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You don't know what it's like to have a dream and have nothing but your wits to make it happen. I chose to put my money into your dream," I shouted, my voice rising. "I chose to support you. I chose to believe in you. I sacrificed my financial security for you." "Sacrifice?" She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "What sacrifice, John? You still have your trust fund. You'll be fine. I had nothing but this idea. And you think you are entitled to half of it, just because you wrote a check? That's not how the world works. That's not how my world works. It's how our world worked. I countered, my voice thick with emotion. We were a team. You called me your partner, your rock. You said we were building this together. Her eyes hard. People say things in the beginning, naive things. I needed capital. You had it. It was a transaction. You helped me, yes. But I am the one who slaved away, who built the brand, who made the connections, who turned an idea into a multi-million-dollar reality. My blood, sweat, and tears are in every single pixel of ArtBridge, not yours. Her words cut deeper than any legal document. She was not just suing me for money. She was erasing my very existence from the history of our shared creation. She was twisting my generosity into a foolish mistake, my love into a transactional error. So this is it then? I asked, feeling a cold despair settle over me. You are just walking away from our marriage, from everything because of this business? She looked away towards the window, her silhouette sharp against the twilight sky. This business is my freedom, John. It's my independence. It's my proof that I can stand on my own 2 feet without anyone's charity. Charity. The word echoed in the empty room, stinging. It wasn't charity. It was a partnership, a gift of love and trust. But to her, it was a handout, something she resented, something she needed to shed to prove her worth. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, documents, and the painful unraveling of my life. News of the lawsuit spread through our mutual friends and acquaintances like wildfire. Some, like Mark, rallied around me, offering support and expressing shock at Sarah's action. Others, especially those who were more connected to the ArtBridge world, sided with Sarah, seeing her as the successful CEO, the visionary who was simply protecting her empire. The public humiliation was immense. Every conversation felt like an interrogation. Every glance felt like judgment. I started to reflect on my past, on my privileged upbringing. Had I been too naive? Had my trust fund blinded me to the harsh realities of the world, to the complexities of human nature, to the darker side of ambition? I had always seen the best in people, especially in Sarah. I had assumed that love and trust were unbreakable. Now, I saw how easily they could be shattered, especially when money and the power it represented entered the equation. The woman I loved, the woman I had built a life with, was a stranger, and she was determined to take everything. The emotional pain was almost unbearable. It wasn't just the money, though that was a huge sum, a chunk of my family's legacy. It was the complete and utter betrayal of my trust, the destruction of my future, and the devastating realization that the foundation of my life had been built on a lie. I felt hollowed out, a ghost in my own home, watching my life get systematically dismantled by the person who once promised to share it with me forever. With the legal battle officially underway, the fight became less about my broken heart and more about cold, hard evidence. Mr. Thompson was methodical, relentless. He believed my story, but belief wasn't enough. We needed proof. We need to reconstruct the timeline, he told me. Every single interaction, every email, every text message, every shared document. Anything that suggests joint ownership, partnership, or even your active role in the business beyond merely providing funds. So I began the arduous, painful process of sifting through years of digital history. It felt like an archaeological dig through the ruins of my marriage. Each old photo, each forgotten email, each cheerful text message from Sarah was a pang to my already bruised heart. I started with my old email accounts. I found dozens of emails from the initial stages of ArtBridge, where Sarah and I were excitedly discussing business plans, financial projections, and marketing strategies. Many of them had subject lines like our ArtBridge vision or joint strategy session. In several, I had attached detailed spreadsheets outlining initial budget allocations, legal frameworks, and even drafts of early partnership agreements I had researched. Then came the texts, hundreds of. Many were simple love notes, but nestled among them were exchanges discussing ArtBridge. Can you review the investor deck for me, honey? Your financial insights are invaluable, she'd text. Or, so glad we're doing this together. Couldn't have built this without you. I found one from just a month before our wedding. Can't believe our company is launching next month. It's all thanks to you, my brilliant partner. These weren't legally binding contracts, but they painted a picture of our shared intent. They showed she viewed me as a partner, not just a benefactor. Mr. Thompson, however, cautioned me. These are helpful for establishing intent and context, John. But her lawyers will argue they're just marital pillow talk, expressions of gratitude, not formal business agreements. We need something more concrete. I dove into my personal banking records, looking for the specific transfers from my trust fund to the ArtBridge business account. Paper trail there was undeniable. Large sums clearly marked as coming from my personal trust, flowing directly into ArtBridge's coffers. We compared these to the business's initial expenses. Every dollar was accounted for, demonstrating that the business was entirely reliant on my funds for its inception and initial growth. Then a breakthrough. I remembered an old external hard drive, packed away in a dusty box, contained backups from my first laptop, the one I used during ArtBridge's early days. On it, I found a trove of files, early website mock-ups I'd helped design with my annotations, presentation slide deck, clearly co-authored by both of us, titled ArtBridge, Our Shared Vision. Minutes from early, informal meetings with potential investors, where both Sarah and I were listed as founders. And most crucially, a document titled Founders Agreement Draft. It was an incomplete document, but it explicitly named both Sarah Jennings and John Miller as co-founders, outlining preliminary discussions about equity split and roles. It was never finalized, never signed, but it existed. When I showed Mr. Thompson the founders' agreement draft, his eyes lit up. This is excellent, John. This shows a clear intent to establish a formal partnership from the very beginning. Even if unsigned, it demonstrates that you weren't just a donor, but an intended co-owner. It was a small glimmer of hope in a sea of despair, but the process was emotionally draining. Each piece of evidence I unearthed, each memory I relived, brought a fresh wave of pain. I saw the happy, trusting couple we once were, the optimistic dreamers, and then the stark reality of what we had become. It felt like performing an autopsy on my own heart. I also reached out to early employees and mutual friends. Some, intimidated by Sarah's power and success, were reluctant to get involved. But a few, truly appalled by Sarah's actions, agreed to provide sworn statements. One early employee, Mark's sister Emily, who had been a marketing intern, remembered me being actively involved in all aspects of the business, not just financial. She recalled Sarah introducing me as her co-founder to new hires and potential clients. She always said you were the one who made it possible, Emily said, her voice filled with sympathy. She relied on your input for everything in the beginning. It wasn't just her company back then, John. It was definitely ArtBridge, brought to you by John and Sarah. Each piece of testimony, each document was a small victory. But it also hammered home the depth of Sarah's betrayal. She was not just claiming ownership of the business. She was claiming ownership of our shared history, attempting to rewrite the narrative to exclude me entirely. It was a calculated, cold-blooded effort to erase my contribution, my love, my very presence from her rise to success. As the piles of evidence grew on Mr. Thompson's desk, so did the weight in my heart. The evidence proved my case, at least in part. But it couldn't bring back the Sarah I loved. It couldn't restore the trust that had been irrevocably shattered. It couldn't heal the wound of knowing the person you loved most was capable of such a profound deception. I was fighting for my financial future, but also for my very dignity, for the truth of what we had built, even if that truth felt like a painful, empty victory. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, a sterile, intimidating atmosphere that smelled faintly of disinfectant and nervous sweat. It was a small room, but it felt vast, like an arena where my shattered life was being put on public display. Sarah sat at a table opposite mine, flanked by her formidable legal team. She wore a sharp, tailored suit, her red hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked every inch the successful CEO, unapproachable, determined. She didn't once look at me. Our respective lawyers presented their opening arguments. Sarah's lawyer, a slick, aggressive woman named Miss Davies, painted a picture of Sarah as a brilliant, self-made entrepreneur who had single-handedly built an empire from scratch. She portrayed my contribution as a generous, but ultimately unqualified financial gift from a wealthy husband to his ambitious wife. She implied I was now trying to exploit Sarah's success, to claim ownership of something I hadn't earned. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, presented a different narrative. He spoke of our shared dream, the years of collaborative work, and the explicit understanding that ArtBridge was a joint venture. He emphasized the substantial financial contribution from my trust fund, a sum that, at the time, represented a significant portion of my assets. He laid out the evidence we'd painstakingly gathered, the emails, the texts, the draft founders agreement, the witness testimonies. Then came the testimonies. Sarah was called first. She spoke eloquently, confidently, about her vision for ArtBridge, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices. She admitted I had provided the seed money, but quickly qualified it, stating it was an act of love and support, not a business investment with any expectation of equity. She said she was grateful for my help in the early days, as any loving husband would assist his wife, but insisted the true work, the intellectual property, the growth, was all hers. Under cross-examination, Mr. Thompson pressed her. "Miss Jennings, do you recall referring to ArtBridge as our company in early communications?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Perhaps in a casual marital context. It was an expression of affection, not a legal statement of ownership." "And did you not, in fact, participate in discussions with Mr. Miller regarding a founders agreement where both your names were listed as co-founder?" "There were many drafts, many ideas exchanged," she said, her voice cool. "Nothing was ever finalized or signed. It was merely a concept that did not come to fruition." She was a master at deflection, a pro at twisting words. She made me sound like a deluded, entitled spouse trying to muscle in on her hard-won success. Her composure was chilling. The woman I had loved, whose every nuance I thought I knew, was now a polished, unfeeling stranger. Then it was my turn, sitting in the witness stand facing a room full of strangers, and the cold, unyielding gaze of Sarah was excruciating. I tried to tell my story simply, honestly. I spoke of our love, our shared excitement, the countless hours we spent together building ArtBridge. I explained how I poured my trust fund money into the venture, not as a gift, but as a joint investment in our shared future. I recounted my active involvement in the legal, financial, and strategic aspects of the business. Under cross-examination from Miss Davies, I felt like I was being picked apart, my memories twisted, my intentions questioned. "Mr. Miller," Miss Davies began, her voice dripping with skepticism, You claim you were a co-founder and partner, yet you held no formal title within the company, received no salary, and have no signed equity agreement. Isn't it true you simply funded your wife's dream as a generous act of spousal support, expecting nothing in return but her happiness? No, I stated, my voice firm despite my pounding heart. I expected a partnership. I expected a shared future. The money was an investment in our company and our life together. The lack of a formal agreement was due to trust, due to our marriage, not due to a lack of intent for ownership. Trust, Mr. Miller, she scoffed, is a subjective emotion. Legal documents are objective. You are asking this court to believe that a man of your financial background, with access to sophisticated legal advice, would simply invest millions without a single piece of paper documenting his stake. That sounds like negligence, Mr. Miller, not partnership. The insinuation stung. She was painting me as foolish, naive, irresponsible, and perhaps in some ways I had been. My trust in Sarah had been absolute, blinding me to the need for legal safeguards. The cross-examination was brutal. They dug into my family's wealth, trying to portray me as someone who didn't understand the value of money, someone who threw it around without consequence. They implied my involvement was superficial, merely a hobby for a man who didn't need to work. Through it all, I kept my gaze fixed on the judge, trying to convey the truth of my heart, the depth of my pain. Sarah remained impassive, her face a mask. There was no flicker of the woman I married, no hint of the tenderness we once shared. She was a CEO protecting her empire, and I was merely an obstacle to be overcome. The hearing lasted for days. Witnesses were called, documents were presented, arguments were made. Each day I left the courtroom feeling hollowed out, emotionally drained. Private anguish of our broken marriage was now a public spectacle, dissected and debated by strangers. I had once believed that love could conquer all, but in that sterile courtroom, facing the woman who was once my world, I realized that some betrayals cut so deep, no love, no truth, no amount of money could ever put things back together. The day the judge delivered the verdict felt like a slow-motion descent into an abyss. I sat in the courtroom, my hands clammy, my heart a drumbeat in my ears. Sarah was there, of course, composed and stoic as ever. The atmosphere was charged with a heavy silence, only broken by the judge's clear, dispassionate voice. The judge acknowledged the complexities of the case, the intermingling of marital dynamics with business ventures. She spoke of intent, of legal precedents, and of the challenge of proving a business partnership when the parties involved were also husband and wife and had no formal written agreement. She noted my substantial financial contribution from my separate trust fund, acknowledging it was indeed the seed capital for ArtBridge. However, she emphasized the lack of a formal signed agreement, explicitly stating my equity ownership. She gave weight to Sarah's argument that while my funds initiated the business, it was Sarah's sole intellectual property, her relentless work, and her strategic leadership that built ArtBridge into the success it became. Then came the hammer blow. Based on the evidence presented, the judge declared, her voice devoid of emotion, and in the absence of a legally binding agreement detailing Mr. Miller's ownership stake, the court finds that the funds provided by Mr. Miller to ArtBridge were indeed a marital gift, or an informal investment without expectation of equity, rather than an explicit co-founding partnership. My breath hitched. The words spun in my head. Marital gift. Informal investment, without expectation of equity. It was exactly what Sarah and her lawyers had argued. The judge continued, therefore the business, ArtBridge, is deemed the sole property of Sarah Jennings. Mr. Miller's claim for half ownership is denied. Cold wave of despair washed over me, numbing me from head to toe. I had lost everything. The money, the business, the dream, the love. It was all gone. The judge did, however, offer a small concession, a bittersweet acknowledgement of my initial contribution. However, she continued, given the substantial nature of the initial funds provided from Mr. Miller's separate trust fund, and considering the lack of any repayment agreement, the court orders Miss Jennings to repay a portion of the original capital as a reasonable restitution for the initial investment, adjusted for inflation but without interest or any claim to business valuation. The amount she named was a fraction of what I had invested, a pittance compared to ArtBridge's current multi-million-dollar valuation. It was a gesture, a symbolic slap on Sarah's wrist, but for me it was a profound loss. It wasn't even enough to cover my legal fees. It was a formal declaration that my contribution was merely a loan, not a partnership. I watched as Sarah's legal team exchanged discreet smiles. Sarah herself showed no emotion, just a slight, almost imperceptible nod of satisfaction. She had won. She had successfully erased me from the history of her company and from our shared life. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a strange emptiness. The weight in my chest was gone, replaced by a vast, aching void. The fight was over, the battle was lost. Truth of our love, our partnership, was irrelevant in the eyes of the law. The news spread quickly. My phone buzzed with texts and calls from friends, some expressing outrage, others offering sympathy. Mark was the first to arrive at my apartment, bringing a six-pack of beer and a quiet presence. He didn't try to offer platitudes, just sat with me in silence as I stared blankly at the wall. My family, while disappointed, also offered a strange kind of comfort. My mother, her voice thick with sadness, told me, "Your trust fund was there to protect you, John. You used it for love, for a dream. That was a risk, my son, a painful one. But it doesn't make you any less." Her words were meant to console, but they only highlighted my foolish naivete. The days that followed were a blur of grief. I was grieving not just the loss of the money or the business, but the loss of a future I had so clearly envisioned. The loss of a love I believed was unbreakable. The loss of my innocence, my belief in unconditional trust. Sarah, meanwhile, continued to thrive. ArtBridge's success only grew, fueled by new investment and positive media coverage, with Sarah front and center, hailed as the self-made titan of the art world. My name was never mentioned. I was a ghost in her victory. The emotional scars were deep. I questioned everything. My judgment, my ability to read people, my understanding of love. Bitterness was a constant companion, a sharp taste in my mouth. My trust fund, once a symbol of security and freedom, now felt like a painful reminder of my greatest failure, the instrument of my own undoing. I had given my future to Sarah, and she had walked away with it, leaving me with nothing but a crushing emptiness and a hard-learned, agonizing lesson about the fragility of trust and the cold, unyielding nature of the law. It's been 2 years since the verdict. 2 years since my world imploded. The initial shock, the raw, searing pain, has dulled, replaced by a persistent ache, like an old wound that still flares up on cold, lonely nights. I still live in the same house, now much too big for one person, a constant reminder of the life Sarah and I built, and a way it was so cruelly snatched away. The money from the trust fund that I had invested, or gifted, as the court ruled, is gone. The small restitution ordered by the judge barely covered a fraction of my legal fees, let alone the principal. I still have a portion of my trust left, enough to live comfortably, but the security and freedom I once felt around it have been replaced by a lingering apprehension. It's no longer a symbol of limitless possibility, but a painful reminder of how easily it can be used against you, how quickly it can be drained when trust is betrayed. I've spent the past 2 years trying to rebuild, not just my life, but myself. The first year was the hardest. I withdrew from friends, spent most of my time alone, lost in a haze of anger and self-pity. My therapist, a kind and patient woman, helped me slowly pick up the pieces. She taught me to acknowledge the grief, to allow myself to feel the anger, but also to recognize when it was time to let go for my own sake. I started small, reconnecting with old hobbies, reading more, volunteering at a local animal shelter. Slowly, the world began to regain some color. I learned to cook, turning our once empty kitchen into a space of creation rather than sorrow. I reconnected with Mark, who was a steadfast friend throughout it all, listening without judgment, offering quiet support. I've also started working again, something I hadn't really needed to do before, not because I have to, but because I need a purpose beyond just existing. I am doing consulting work, helping small businesses with their initial setup and financial planning. The irony isn't lost on me. I am now the one advising others on the importance of ironclad contracts, of protecting themselves, of never assuming love is enough. It's a painful expertise, but a valuable one. I occasionally see news about Sarah and ArtBridge. She's become a formidable figure in the tech and art world, a regular on top CEO list. Her face graces the covers of business magazines, her success story hailed as an inspiration. Sometimes a casual acquaintance will mention her, completely unaware of the devastating personal cost of her triumph. I nod politely, offer a vague, non-committal response and change the subject. The wound still hurts too much to speak of it openly. I haven't seen Sarah in person since the trial. I don't know if I ever will. I don't know what I would say. Would I express my bitterness, my profound disappointment, my lingering love perhaps for the woman she once was? I don't think so. Here is nothing left to say. The person I loved is gone, replaced by someone I don't recognize. Someone who chose ambition over our shared life. What I've learned from this devastating experience is profound. I learned that trust, while essential for love, must also be tempered with pragmatism, especially when significant finances are involved. I learned that generosity, when unconditional and undocumented, can be weaponized. I learned that people can change, that their priorities can shift, and that ambition can consume even the most loving of hearts. But I also learned about my own resilience. I survived. I am still here. I am not the same naive, trusting person I was. The world feels sharper, more dangerous, but also more real. I am more guarded, yes, but also more self-aware. I am learning to trust my instincts, to set boundaries, to protect myself. Pain of the betrayal, the loss of my financial future in that business, and the emotional wreckage of my marriage will always be a part of me. It's a scar, deep and permanent. But it no longer defines me. I am no longer just the guy who got sued by his wife. I am John, navigating a new chapter, slowly, cautiously. Building a life not based on shared dreams that can be taken away, but on my own strength, my own purpose, and the quiet hope that one day I will be able to trust again, fully and truly, without the crushing fear of another devastating betrayal. The road ahead is long, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I am moving forward.